Twins reunited through viral TikTok DNA challenge. In early 2025, stories of surprising DNA discoveries were drawing growing public attention. Some reunions played out quietly in private, while others unfolded in front of large audiences online. Researchers have noted that social media often amplifies these moments, turning what might once have been an intimate family exchange into something shared and witnessed by thousands. But one well-documented case, reported by The New Yorker, shows how profoundly a DNA test alone can rewrite a life story, without needing a viral gimmick to bring it into focus. Mia Griffin, who was adopted as an infant, had lived her entire life with questions about her biological family. When she decided to send her DNA to one of the major consumer testing companies, she expected little more than generalized ancestry results and perhaps a distant cousin match. Instead, the database instantly connected her to close biological relatives, including people she never knew existed. Unlike the vague family stories she had grown up with, this was concrete proof, scientific confirmation of ties that had been hidden from her all along. The emotional weight of those results was immediate. When her match notifications lit up, they didn't just signal relatives in some abstract chart. They pointed directly to siblings and parents she had never met. Within weeks of submitting her test, Mia found herself exchanging messages with genetic family members and piecing together both her origin story and the circumstances that led to her adoption. For her, the discovery cut through years of uncertainty, offering both answers and a path toward reconnection. When Mia finally arranged to meet her biological relatives, the moment was as raw as it was revealing. Reports describe hugs that carried the force of decades, conversations layered with relief, awkwardness, and excitement, and the quiet realization that absence had not erased resemblance. Just as in other research-documented cases, she experienced a collision of feelings: joy at finding kin, grief for the lost years, and hesitancy about what to do next with these new connections. Genetic counseling experts point to cases like Griffin's as proof of how testing has accelerated the pace of family reunions. What once might have required searches through sealed records or expensive private investigators can now occur with a few clicks, and sometimes in a matter of days. For adoptees in particular, the shift is enormous. DNA databases act not just as search tools, but as bridges, compressing timelines and placing relatives face-to-face far sooner than many are ready for. The broader trend is equally revealing. Many reunions today are documented through platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. Family meetings that once happened behind closed doors can now appear in feeds watched by strangers. That visibility adds another layer of complexity. The emotions of discovery are heightened not just by the presence of long-lost relatives, but also by the awareness that others are watching the reunion unfold in real time. Mia's story wasn't built on a viral stunt, but its coverage underscored how public these journeys can become once they resonate with wider audiences. What stands out is how profoundly one simple test reshaped Mia's understanding of who she was and who she belonged to. Her experience offers a clear example of how DNA results can collapse distance, erase long-standing uncertainties, and bring people together with almost startling speed. And yet, if one unexpected sibling or parent can be life-changing, the shock takes on another scale entirely when a single person discovers not one or two newfound relatives, but dozens. The man with 47 half-siblings. When one man logged into his DNA account, the results went far beyond what he had imagined. Instead of the expected few new relatives, his matches revealed dozens of genetic half-siblings, all connected by the same sperm donor father. In some documented donor conception cases, a single donor has fathered several dozen children, with reports of individuals discovering groups as large as 30 or more. For him, what began as a routine search for heritage quickly turned into a collision with an enormous, unexpected sibling network. The scale was overwhelming. Growing up, he accepted the explanation his mother had given about using a donor, and he assumed that meant maybe a few unknown half-brothers or sisters scattered somewhere out there. What he hadn't pictured was opening his test results only to see lists of names stretching down the screen, each one linked to him through the same donor. Photographs exchanged through the platform confirmed the connection. Shared jawlines, repeated smiles, and expressions that seemed to echo across faces of people who had never met. Once introductions began, the reality set in even further. One sibling organized a private group chat, and it instantly became a hub of activity. Every few weeks, new half-siblings joined as more people ran their tests, expanding the network. Conversations captured both curiosity and disbelief, comparing family stories about the donor profile, cross-referencing medical information, and marveling at uncanny similarities in talents and traits. Some noted overlapping interests and recognizable quirks, while others focused on broader concerns, such as shared genetic risks that suddenly felt less theoretical. That sudden expansion of family also cast light on a deeper problem. For decades, fertility practices in many places operated with minimal oversight, and limits on donor use were vague, inconsistent, or unenforced. Clinics often reused the same donor many times without informing prospective parents how many children already existed from that choice. By the time consumer DNA tests took off, those quiet decisions meant that donor-conceived people could discover dozens of unexpected siblings at once. Cases like his fed into broader policy conversations about whether strict limits should be enforced, how families should be informed, and what safeguards are needed to protect both health and identity. For the man who stumbled into this discovery, the adjustment was not immediate. At first, it felt more like a tidal wave than an opportunity. Over time, however, the group conversations gave him a sense of shared belonging, even in a form of family he had never imagined. Rather than finding one missing piece of a personal history, he ended up in the middle of a complex living network that kept growing around him. These connections capture how modern DNA testing continues to redefine established ideas of kinship, raising questions not just in personal circles, but in ethics, medicine, and law. And while donor networks may highlight gaps in present-day policy, other discoveries reach backward across centuries, uncovering how survival and identity were navigated in some of history's darkest moments. Survival by false identities during the Holocaust. When families today use DNA testing, they sometimes uncover not just relatives or new ancestry percentages, but entire identities that were rewritten in moments of crisis. Across different parts of the world, archives show that many people during the 20th century and earlier adopted new names, changed ethnic self-descriptions, or altered records entirely in order to survive persecution, displacement, or political instability. DNA can now expose those hidden shifts, reconnecting descendants with lineages that paper documents alone could never reveal. One family's modern-day test results highlighted this reality in striking ways. Their DNA matches linked them not to the familiar surnames passed down through oral tradition, but to entirely different family networks, names, and regions that had never been acknowledged in their household. At first, it seemed like a mistake. Only when the results were viewed against surviving records did the picture take shape. Generations earlier, their relatives had redefined themselves in order to stay safe during times of violence and exclusion. In practice, this meant many of the certificates and registry entries they had long trusted were not faithful reflections of their biological history. Birthplaces were shifted, surnames altered, religious or ethnic fields left blank or falsified. Under the stress of persecution, families made choices that disrupted the official record but ensured that descendants could live on. DNA analysis connected those fragments, showing that what had appeared to be unrelated clusters were in fact branches from the same family tree. The emotional impact of confronting this truth was considerable. For decades, the family had embraced a cultural trajectory they thought was continuous and unbroken. The evidence now suggested otherwise. Their ancestors had actively concealed or reshaped that identity to survive. Instead of clarifying a single true heritage, the DNA expanded their story, forcing them to accept both the erased lineage and the survival identities that had been carried for so long in silence. Such moments echo findings described in contemporary studies, where discovering altered origins often leaves descendants balancing grief, pride, and a more complicated understanding of their past. Re-examining family artifacts with this new knowledge revealed details that had once seemed like insignificant clerical errors. Migration documents included suspicious inconsistencies. Marriage licenses contained multiple spellings of supposedly stable surnames. Even religious records suggested conversions that were never acknowledged later. Viewed together, those irregularities reinforced what the DNA had made clear. The family's very survival had required new labels, official or otherwise, that masked a hidden continuity of bloodlines beneath. Rather than reject the generations that had made those choices, the descendants chose to honor them. They began to approach their genealogy as layered rather than linear, recognizing both the names taken for protection and the ones rooted in blood ties. In doing so, they gave meaning to altered identities not as betrayals of truth, but as acts of courage under impossible conditions. Cases like this illustrate how DNA testing is changing not only how people think about family, but also how they reckon with history. For some, it means reconciling with erased identities and survival strategies from the past. For others, the most dramatic surprises come not from ancestors in archives, but from unexpected connections discovered in their own immediate lives, including revelations that unfold inside familiar workplaces. CDO finds parents were her own employees. Sometimes DNA testing doesn't just uncover biological parents, it reveals they have been much closer all along. Research and survey accounts describe people discovering that the individuals who raised them weren't their biological family, only to learn through DNA that their birth parents turned out to be far more familiar figures, neighbors, old family friends, or even co-workers they had known for years. These situations collapse the boundary between private identity and public life in ways few could anticipate. In documented cases, adoptees or donor-conceived individuals submitted their saliva samples expecting nothing more than an ancestry breakdown, but the match results pointed directly to people they already saw every day. Instead of a new name or a stranger appearing in the database, it was someone whose phone number was already in their contacts, whose face they passed in the hallway, or whose door was just across the street. The tests didn't only rewrite their biological history, they reframed their present environment completely. Accounts of these scenarios often describe a strange blend of recognition and disbelief. On one hand, the person was no longer a stranger. They'd already shared moments of conversation, laughter, or work collaboration. On the other, the DNA introduced an entirely new context to that relationship. This was not simply a coworker, neighbor, or family friend, but a biological parent. The ordinary spaces of office floors, childhood blocks, or living room visits suddenly became the unlikely stage where hidden lineage had been unfolding unnoticed for years. For those caught in these discoveries, the emotional response can be complicated. Some describe it as a relief, because the distance of searching for unknown relatives collapses into the comfort of familiarity. Others feel shock or even betrayal, wrestling with the knowledge that someone close to them carried a secret capable of altering their entire self-understanding. In either case, the disruption is profound. The divide between personal and professional, between private memory and everyday routine, disappears in an instant. The practical challenges also ripple outward. How do you renegotiate a neighborly chat when you now know that person is your biological parent? How do you balance an office hierarchy with a familial bond revealed by science? These are not abstract questions, but ones that people navigating NPE discoveries, not parent expected, have faced directly. Researchers studying NPE outcomes have emphasized the strain that secrecy places on relationships, noting that the sudden exposure of hidden truths often forces individuals to redefine roles, boundaries, and expectations in ways that feel disorienting. In many families, silence about origins was once seen as the kindest option or the safest safeguard. But consumer DNA testing has steadily dismantled that silence, bringing hidden relationships to light in settings no one anticipated. Where family ties exist, they will eventually show themselves once samples find their way into the swelling databases. And as more people test, the chances of such revelations only intensify. What these stories illustrate is the sheer unpredictability of DNA testing outcomes. Sometimes the truth emerges in a workplace cafeteria or just across the street from home. Other times, the consequences stretch into entire medical systems, uncovering patterns of secrecy on a scale that affects not just a handful of families, but hundreds. And that broader impact became undeniable when disturbing details about reproductive medicine began surfacing, details that only DNA testing could have exposed. The fertility doctor scandal, father of 200+. One of the most unsettling discoveries to emerge from consumer DNA testing has been the fertility doctor scandals. Over the past decade, multiple cases have shown that certain physicians secretly used their own sperm or substituted donors without consent, while treating patients who had turned to them for reproductive help. In these documented cases, DNA later revealed dozens, and in some investigations, far more children, all traced back to the very doctors who had claimed to be facilitating safe, transparent treatments. The truth usually surfaced in fragments. Adult children, often testing their DNA for fun or curiosity, began noticing dozens of close genetic matches with no obvious family connection. Each new test added another piece to the puzzle. What at first looked like coincidences became impossible to dismiss once the matches stretched across entire states and regions. In some of the largest scandals uncovered, more than 50 children were eventually connected to the same physician, and the numbers continued climbing as new results came in. For the families involved, the fallout was devastating. Parents believed they had made deliberate and informed choices about their fertility treatments, carefully selecting donor characteristics, health backgrounds, and family histories. To learn that those safeguards had been ignored, that their doctor had replaced agreed-upon donors with himself, was a deep betrayal. Instead of medical integrity, there had been manipulation. For the children conceived under these circumstances, the revelations carried even heavier weight. The man responsible was not a faceless donor, but the physician who had occupied a position of trust and authority. The harm extended far beyond emotional betrayal. Many donor-conceived individuals emphasize the importance of accurate medical information, since unknown hereditary conditions can affect not just themselves but their own children. In cases where a doctor acted without disclosure, those children grew up with medical histories based on fabricated or incomplete information. The absence of truth carried risks to both physical health and personal identity. These scandals also underscored the weaknesses in oversight. Fertility clinics in many countries operated for years under inconsistent regulations, leaving space for abuses of trust at the most intimate levels. Only after commercial genetic testing became widespread did these truths begin to surface, exposing misconduct that might otherwise have remained hidden indefinitely. The revelations led to lawsuits, criminal investigations, and growing public pressure for reform. Across legislatures, policymakers were pushed to debate stricter rules on record keeping, disclosure practices, and limits on donor use to prevent similar violations. Courts, however, struggled to define the boundaries of accountability. Was this fraud, malpractice, or a type of sexual violation under the law? Families pressed for answers, but the legal system often lagged behind the scale and specificity of the harm. Meanwhile, advocacy groups called for international registries and stronger consent protections, insisting that children born through donor conception deserve transparent records from the very start. What makes these cases especially striking is how their discovery began with something ordinary: a simple home DNA kit purchased and mailed in without much thought. Instead of ancestry charts or quirky cousin matches, families received evidence of deception sustained over decades. The scale, the secrecy, and the betrayal turned recreational science into a tool of accountability, reshaping both personal lives and national conversations about reproductive ethics. Not every shocking discovery comes from misconduct on that scale. Some situations are more intimate but still deeply unsettling, forcing people to reconsider the hidden connections inside their own families and marriages.